Welcome, everyone, to the second Tech and Tie-dye Community Meetup. We're very happy that you decided to spend some of your time to join us. I'm Charles, I'm the marketing plugin at LSD, and I arrange these events. And it's really a place where to share ideas about tech, business insights, just basically everything that makes you better at what you do. And there's a lot of new faces around. Welcome. And lots of friends of the community back in for the second event. Thank you for joining us again. This is around creating value for you. Everything is around sharing, discussing, and creating. And hopefully through the talks we have, we can sort of plant, some ideas and cause some light bulbs to go off. If you have any ideas and you want to display them on this platform, reach out. Also, it's Women's Month. Happy Women's Month. There are many seats at the table here. You heard. We'll learn, listen, and for much longer than a month. Thank you very much, ladies, for joining us tonight. And then Tech and Tie-dye is always around encouraging diversity because we believe many people have many different stories and insights to learn, and we encourage people to reach out. If you have an interesting story or insight to share, contact me on techandtiedye@lsd.co.za and we'll start a conversation. And most importantly, these meetups are around having fun. We take that very seriously here. So tonight's agenda is going to be incredible. We've got Annette Muller. She's the founder and CEO of Flexyforce joining us to tell us 5 myths about starting a software as a service business in South Africa. I'd like to thank Annette for agreeing to do this. Forbes Africa has a couple of times now named her one of the 10 female tech founders to watch in Africa. I think the insight that's going to come from this is really great and valuable to our community, and thank you again for doing this. Right after, we've got a very cool demo, which is a collaboration between LSD and our partners, DigiCloud Africa, Google, and Ayoko Cloud Services. And we'd like to thank them all for taking part in this and, agreeing to help us show off this amazing technology. Really, thank you all for attending. So next up is Annette.
Hey, hi guys, I'm Annette. I decided a couple years back to do something really crazy and start my own software business without being a software engineer. And I think today I'm going to just share some of my learnings and some of the things I've come to learn the hard way. So I don't know if there's anyone else in the audience was crazy enough to build a software as a service business, but yeah, it's been quite an interesting journey. Maybe a little bit of background just to put it in context. So before Flexyforce, I ran a consulting business called didnt. And we worked on a number of different innovation projects with top tier blue chip clients, which was awesome. You're kind of not in this risky situation. You're just telling other people how to innovate, and you're managing projects, and you're using other people's products and technologies to deliver beautiful things. But it was a little bit boring after a little while. I was like, I really want to get in there and also build a product. And it was more or less about the time where the gig economy started becoming, this big global buzzword, and platforms like Upwork and TopTel and Gigster and Fiverr and everything started come to the forefront. And we at .next at the time also used a lot of freelancers and contractors and independent consultants and experts. And we also had to import sometimes some specialized skills from Europe or the US and lure them to Cape Town with a mountain. And there was a lot of administration around this that, us as a small consulting firm couldn't really handle. But yeah, off the back of that, the first version of Flexi arrived. It was called, she's had many different facelifts, and I'll get to one of my myths around a pivot. But the first version was called Flexi Skills, and it was South Africa's first job marketplace. So we had this awesome network of innovation consultants, and on the other hand, companies who were looking for freelancers. And we had Standard Bank buy up all of our top innovation consultants in one contract, But it was a really good learning, and that business we ran for about 2 years, or the first version, or a year and a half. And we quickly learned that it's going to be very difficult to compete against Upwork and Fiverr. It was almost like trying to build Facebook and Twitter in 2007. The market was already saturated. There were already hundreds of these gig platforms. And in South Africa, unfortunately, with a high unemployment rate, you just had this extreme, I would say, silent marketplace. So you had all of these guys, and we ran one Facebook campaign, and we had like 15,000 freelancers applying the next day. And it just showed you how many of these people were out there looking for jobs, but how few companies at that point in time were interested in hiring them. So you just ended up sitting with a bunch of disgruntled people who never got work. But the learning was that we realized very quickly, why are companies struggling with this, or what other problems are there? And a couple of them came to the forefront, being the administration around working with freelancers, and legally, what does that agreement look like? What does the tax look like? Once you've now found this freelancer, how do they become part of your team? What does this contingent workforce and the management thereof look like? And yeah, after a couple of iterations or versions, we today now at Flexyforce. She's become her own little character. She's naturally a woman because she's very good at admin. And we like to think of her as the Siri of B2B software as a service products. We did quite a bit of research into it and realized that often these software as a service products, they can be quite difficult to market because you've got a lot of noise, and to break through the clutter, you had to be creative. So yeah, so we created Flexyforce as a character, and there she is. And for anyone afterwards who's interested, can book a demo, and I can take you through some of the key features. But yeah, today she helps companies in a nutshell to basically do the onboarding of all your contract workers, or what we term agile suppliers. And for those of you who don't know this term agile suppliers, it's kind of just the term we came up with, for lack of a better one, that includes contract workers, freelancers, consultants, shift workers, small to medium enterprises, one-man shows, solopreneurs, all the way up to VAT registered entities that you don't necessarily put on your traditional vendor onboarding system, but that you work with in a more micro or frequent fashion, that all ultimately form part of this contingent workforce. So she helps you onboard them. She makes sure that you're compliant and that they submit all their documents, and it's all safely done in her cloud, on the Google Cloud. And and then the second part, she does all the contract management. So all your contracts are digitized. And then she also does these micro work brief bookings, so work orders, and then ultimately facilitate the payments and help you and your supplier have visibility of all of that throughout the way. And this is obviously without having to do tons of emails backwards and forwards and tons of spreadsheets. So she takes all of that admin and puts it seamlessly in one place. So that's Flexyforce. And yeah, she's pretty cool because she's software. She's a great employee. If you hire her, she doesn't give you any drama. She doesn't talk back. There's no lunch breaks or leave requests or burnouts. She works 24/7. So yeah, she's a great team player. She likes everyone. She gets on with everyone. And she's super affordable. So that's Flexyforce. So what have I learned? So firstly, there was this myth in the beginning, and I don't know why I believed it. Maybe I was just being silly and naive, but it went around the block a lot, where people say, just get users and the money will come. And I think maybe this is true for other kinds of software businesses or mobile apps, but for B2B specifically and software as a service businesses, in our experience, it was actually the opposite. Like once you get users and they, just getting the users doesn't mean the money will come. The hardest part is actually getting people to pay for your software, to make sure that you add enough value and you solve a big enough problem that people are willing to pay for it. Because you can develop anything, and if people aren't willing to pay for it, then are you really adding enough value? So that was something that we really had to hone in on. And I know in hindsight, it sounds super simple. Obviously there's a problem, you solve the problem, and then people will pay to get that problem solved. But in reality, it's not as crystal clear from the beginning. So that was the first thing we had to learn, that it's not about getting the users and the money will come. It's more about define the problem really clearly and solve it very smartly, and people will pay for it. If that makes sense. So then the second big myth, which I think is worth chatting about a little bit, is there's also this thing where a lot of people talk about the pivot, which is like a rite of passage for an entrepreneur. And if you haven't pivoted, you don't have a real startup. And in my experience, I think this is an absolute myth. I think pivots are incredibly expensive. And I guess firstly, you have to define what is the pivot, like how do you define a pivot? And by my definition, it is where the business substantially changes. So when we went from a job marketplace to a software as a service business, that whole business changed. The business model changed, the actual software changed, the marketing changed. It was actually a completely different business. And the danger of the word pivot is that you don't truly begin from scratch again. I think to just say that business model didn't work for us, or that business didn't work, and you cut that and then you start a new business, I think that's actually a lot cleaner and better, because otherwise you're constantly working on this pivot. So you're almost introducing a third step, which is completely unnecessary, where you could have just learned the lessons and started something new. You're now like working on this pivot, and you're constantly changing instead of just, stopping the one business and starting the new one. So yeah, I think if it's small iterative learnings, it's one thing. But I think if in such early stages of the business changes substantially, I've actually learned that pivots, they're a myth, and they're just incredibly expensive and time consuming. So if you are busy building a software business and you're in the super early stages and you realize it's not really what you want to do, or what potentially is going to work or scale, or what the market wants, then I would suggest not to fall for that word pivot, and rather start from scratch. And what that means, starting from scratch, is like the basics, all that initial strategic work, or the business model canvas, just to put context to it. And I'm not saying you have to do that, but a lot of that initial work, when you pivot, you kind of feel the need that you're not doing that again, because you've kind of already done it. And I think that's part of the main things that I feel that we've learned as a business, is that, don't fall for the pivot, rather start from scratch and then really start from scratch again. Then the third myth is that there's a ton of awesome digital marketing companies in South Africa that can help you with your B2B software as a service, digital sales and acquisition. There's not. And I think this has been one of our hardest things, is to really get the marketing right. And when I say marketing, it's not the traditional marketing, it's the digital marketing, and being able to like pioneer in that space. And I think there's a lot to discuss here. I by no means have all the answers, but just one thing we've learned is that specifically in South Africa, and I guess you guys would know a lot more about that, selling software in Sizwe and the guys from LSD, that people still like a bit of a human in South Africa. They buy software still in more of a traditional way than what they necessarily go and buy online. So it is a challenge. So then when you open up direct sales channels and you have to market those, not only is it difficult to find people who have done that before, because there are so few companies who have actually done that successfully in South Africa. So you end up having to pioneer this digital sales channel. And I mean, this is the big part of a software as a service business. If we look at the rest of the world, a lot of these other brands that you see on the screen there, they don't necessarily have human sales forces, especially if your pricing is really low. So if your pricing is as good as a system like Flexyforce's, how do you get that scale with humans? So that was a big lesson, and it's still an ongoing question, and we're learning every day, and we're getting better and better at it to break through in the way that South African businesses specifically buy software online, especially now post-COVID, and also looking at the different reseller and distribution programs. For those who know Xero, I mean, I think they've done a really good job in the way that they've tackled different markets with their distribution networks through accounting firms. And even HubSpot has taken the route of getting partner agencies and implementing their software, but these are all still quite complex software, where Flexyforce is a lot more easily administered and implemented within the business. It's not, you don't need like 10 hours to figure out how HubSpot works, or in Xero's case, be an accountant to set certain things up. So this was a big myth for us and a big learning curve, and it's an ongoing challenge. And I'm open to any ideas from this meetup in how we can get Flexyforce to help more people spend less time on admin, because ultimately that's the problem that we solve. People are so busy. They spend so much time on being busy that they don't spend enough time on business, and a lot of the time we don't realize that. But when we look back at our time and how we were productive, we spent like 50% of our days on admin that we really could have automated. So there's a myth that kind of ties into that statement, which we always talk about internally as well, which is like, will the robot take my job or save my company? And then by saving my company, it will ultimately save my job. And we obviously think the fact that the robot will take my job is a myth, and that the latter is true. And that in today's day and age, especially now with post-COVID, that the software will ultimately, and automation will ultimately save your business. And I'm sure you guys are also evangelists of that and sharing that with your clients. Then this is another myth, and I'm sure that a lot of people will disagree with me on this. But I do feel that this is something that we've fallen into, that gets told quite a lot, where people say, first build your company locally and succeed in one market, succeed in South Africa, and then you go abroad. And I think there is merit in it, but I have also learned from my experience now and looking back and really evaluating things, that it depends what the product is. If the product is the kind of product that is very uniquely altered or made for a specific market, then absolutely. But if the product is not defined by barriers per region, then the whole world is your marketplace. And I wish someone told me this like in the beginning, or perhaps people did and I just didn't listen. But what we've learned is, when it gets to software as a service, you actually can't think per like country anymore. You have to think as the world, as global. You have to think of it as a flat marketplace. If you're going the digital sales acquisition, and run your experiments in different markets to see where your digital marketing, which is what I've come to learn as software as a service business really is, it's really just one big content marketing engine. So you spend time developing really good products, but ultimately it's all about the marketing and the CRM post that. So I think often what would happen in South Africa, and certainly what we've learned, is that you have false hypotheses. So you test certain things with a very unique market, and then the outcomes are unique to the specific market, where it may be completely different in a different market. And that's why it's so important to run these hypotheses or tests globally. And some of my friends who have built successful businesses internationally, they didn't actually believe this myth of first build your company and make it be successful in South Africa. They built a product that solved a problem, and they did tests and found the most random markets to be actually their first early adopter markets. So yeah, I think this is an ongoing debate, and I'm very happy to be challenged on this. But I think where I stand at the moment is that it's better to define the market that you're going after by virtue of the problem that you're trying to solve and who has that problem, and keep it all online if that is where you want to ultimately go and sell, because it's super difficult to go from offline and having conversations and meetings and doing the human route to go further digitally. So yeah, I hope this leaves some food for thought. Again, I don't have all the answers, but it's definitely something, if I had to start again, that I would be a lot more aware of the fact that your product that you're building or the service that you're offering from a B2B software as a service perspective needs to be scalable and adaptable across regions. And then, yeah, this is also another myth. You know, people always say, get to market as fast as possible to test and learn. And maybe it's true with other businesses, but in my experience, this racing to the market is super dangerous, especially if you're working in an innovative product. I think there's a thing where you must be worried about the competitors and someone that can come and take you out, but never at the expense of rushing. You know, one of the early fuck-ups that we made is that we almost went to market too soon, and then you hire teams and you're dealing with operations thing, and the next thing you have all these costs where you're actually not there yet. You know, then you end up like overspending because you're operating, but there's so much that you haven't figured out yet, or that you haven't perfected yet. So it is this catch-22, because you want early user feedback, but you also don't really want to do that while operating because it's super expensive. So yeah, so I think that lean innovation is really important till you have enough scale to have data to effectively test, because that's also another thing. Like in the early stages of a startup, there's so much that you need to do that you don't have high quality data yet. And it's very few startups that have like super high quality data from the beginning. How can you? Because you won't be a startup if you only have small amounts of clients, and you'll only have proper data sets if you have large amount of clients, and proper data infrastructure, because it's probably not going to be the top priority. You are trying to build a product, so you're just trying to not have bugs, never mind like data, and you're running on limited resources. So yeah, this is also an interesting myth where people, you know, say just get to market, where I've actually now got a whole different approach where if I have to do this again or do it all over again, I would go really slowly and really take my time, or let the team take their time, one step at a time, not even hire another person, and just take quite a mindful, you said that word in the beginning, Charles, quite a mindful approach in terms of approaching the market. Like I don't feel the market is going to run away. If you have a really good product, you can come in late and still solve that problem. So yeah, so I think here the big learning was that rushing can often be more expensive than going slow. So yeah, I don't know if this has helped or if everyone has some questions, but yeah, these are like sort of some of the top 5 things that we've learned. And then I guess it would be wrong to not say that there is no such thing as perfect code base. But I think everyone knows that. And the utopia of the perfect environment is something that I had to learn very quickly as a non-engineer, but founder of a software business. Yeah, definitely advise getting technical co-founders from the beginning.
Are there any questions?
I have a question. I'm always very like in awe of founders in general, and like I guess you're a strong female founder and a tech founder in that same space. Like, I don't know, is there any insights to that from your perspective? Yeah, I'm just kind of curious.
What do you mean insights to being a woman versus being a guy?
Just like your experience have you found it, I guess, equitable and yeah, I mean, has it been fair in that sense, I guess?
It's a very difficult question to answer. I'm going to answer it in two parts. One, I think if you look at yourself as something that could be discriminated towards or as something different, then you'll ultimately feel different. And I don't know if I'm just weird, but I've never felt like a girl necessarily. I just felt like a founder or an entrepreneur or some crazy person building software and trying to scale a business. But I've never looked at myself as, oh, I'm a woman. I think that's what other people have put on the table. And especially now with Women's Month, I actually am so over people going around throwing this concept of women in tech and women leadership. It's almost like you're, without meaning to, you're creating an isolated group. You're creating inequality by differentiating between the two, because it shouldn't be that way. Okay, so that's the one thing. So personally, I've never felt from a young age, even when I .next, I never walked into a room and thought of myself as, here I am and I'm the woman in the room. I never felt like that. Having said that, I have, of course, been treated like the woman in the room, where I've been in meetings. And I remember I went with the Small Business Institute of South Africa. We did a pilot and still this ongoing thing that we're doing with them. And we arrived at this guy in Annette Muller, and they were, the SBI is using the software to create their database of little businesses. And he was like, so this is really cool software. Can I please speak to like one of the owners? Can you give me the details of one of the owners of the company? And I was like, yeah, I'm one of the owners of the company. And he's like, no, I mean, like, you probably work for them in sales or marketing. If you can just, like, give me one of the like owners of the company, like who owns this company. And it was just hilarious that he just assumed, just because I'm a woman, he was like, you must be in sales and marketing in the business. So that has happened to me before, but I didn't care about it. I was like, whatever, he's obviously like discriminating. But I do think maybe for other people, it could be like disheartening and at certain times feel like it's unfair, and therefore, there's like not equal opportunity around the opportunities that you would get or the respect that you maybe deserve. But I do think it's in your own hands to decide how you're going to react to that. If that answers your question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks.
I was thinking about going to market, what you mentioned about taking your time and going to market. How do you decide between the opportunity cost of taking your time to going to market and, letting a competitor get in there versus getting into the market first and failing miserably at that? At what point do you kind of look at it and see this is the correct time? At what point do you know?
I wish I had the answer to that question. If I did, I would launch a business every month. So I don't think anyone can really have a crystal ball to know exactly when to go in. But I do think one way of looking at it is at the cost. So the cost of what you're currently spending and how long, Stefan always says this, how long till that money runs out? Like how long till you can't not be in the market? And so I think it depends on the burn that you're burning before you go to market. And if you are smart in that burn and you go for that first myth, which is not go for the users and all of that, you go straight for solving the problem and getting the money, I think then you have a winning formula. And whether you're the leader or the lagger, there's pros and cons. Often the company leading the market, if the company that's leading the market and leading the innovation, then I think you have a winning combination. But then you're also going to need lots of money, because you always have to make sure that you're most innovative, you're ahead from a product perspective, and you're ahead in the market. But if you're not ahead in the market, but you can still be ahead in the product, then it's okay to be the lagger because you can learn from your competitors and see what they're doing. So like, I don't have a straight answer, but I do think the metric and how you're measuring it comes down to the money. And I think that's where you often get tied up in the race to market and the rush and having to fulfill all these goals and things that you need to achieve, that you lose track of the reality, which is the cost of what it takes to actually build this, and the cost that you, of the time that it takes to figure things out, if that makes sense.
It does. Steph just added a comment here saying, also through wrong decisions based on too much or not enough money also. So starting and ending with also. But yeah, are there any other questions? I saw someone, there we go, Tianis.
They unmute my headphones. Some really, really good points, and I like the fact that they're very opposite to what most people are saying, especially the rush part, right? So there's a difference between going too quickly. Where's that line? Where would you say is that line between I'm ready now, I didn't rush, and it's too early? Like what would make you feel comfortable to go? Is it the size of your product? Is it like, where would you be comfortable to say I didn't rush this, I'm okay? What would give you that indication? Finances, users, product.
Yeah, I think
quality.
I think the best way to answer that is to go back to the point, which is don't rush, but do race. So you can't sit on things, and the difference between the rushing and the racing is how you do it. Like, just to make it very basic, if I'm rushing to like get the table set for dinner, it's possibly going to take me 10 times longer because I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to work backwards, forwards. You know, you're rushing. Where if you're racing, you know just that you have a certain amount of time and a certain amount of resources to get it done. So you're more methodical and aware of what it is that you have at your disposal in order to reach that goal. And you're not fixated on what that goal entails, but rather ensuring that the table is properly set, even if it's just for one person. I don't know if my analogy makes sense, but that's the best way I can explain it. But again, from a metrics perspective, I think it's having really, really good handle on the costs, and not to spend anything before it's time, not to hire before it's time. Even just in the very beginning, just work on the concept for as long as you need to. You know, I sometimes do feel people have this rush, and I had it myself. You know, you have this concept and you're like, oh, I have to get to market, I have to test it, I have to learn, I have to get customers, got to go see a bunch of customers. And if I look back, if I just didn't rush, if I just went and said, okay, it's okay to take the next 6 months, we're not going to spend any money, but we're actually going to take the next 6 months and figure stuff out, I think that's okay. But yeah, without, of course, taking 100 months, that's also not going to work. So you need to have clear visibility on your time and money that you have available. I don't know if I'm answering the question.
No,
I feel like
perfect.
I'm blabbering.
Yeah, I have one.
So was that Fabian?
Yes, it was. So you said, you know, test the local market. It helps having a technical co-founder and stuff like that. But what's sort of your view? It's not really a question. It's more like I'm not sure what it was. But if you don't have that at your disposal, you know, what's your view on outsourcing those skills? Obviously, it would be at a lower cost and a quicker time because it would be time bound, versus, you know, doing it internally with that co-founder or that team. Sort of what point do you outsource? Do you outsource? Do you insource? And you know, how would you manage that?
It's a very good question. I feel like I did it all wrong, so I don't have the right answer for you, but I can tell you what I've learned. If you are not technical, it's really difficult to manage developers. So to then have an in-house team, you are going to have to equip yourself and be very aware of the fact then that you are going to have to manage the engineers. And it is difficult to manage engineers if you're not technical, because you don't know what you don't know. That's the one part. And the other part is taking the responsibility, which you almost can't expect of someone that you're just employing. Yes, there are the odd person, and I've had incredible engineers on our team, and they have taken responsibility, but just because they're not in that founding position, or they're not fully invested in the company, or they're not in it for the long run, it's only natural that their decisions are made with another lens. So you can't really blame them, but then you must be aware that that's what you're going to get. You're going to almost get like short-term problem solving, and they may not stand up against you when they disagree with things, because it's more important to do a good job as an employee than what it is necessarily to build a really good product. So I don't know, it's a tricky one. From an outsourcing perspective, the financial model is really difficult. So if you are crystal clear on what you want to build, like if you are crystal clear and you know you're not going to change your mind, and you know things aren't going to change, which I've never seen, then I would say outsourcing could be more cost effective. But then you have to have a really simple product, and you have to be very clear of it. In our case, we were still figuring things out, and you're learning. So it wasn't like we knew exactly what Flexyforce is today. I didn't know that 4 years ago. So we had to learn of what was actually useful to users as well. And I think with that, it's very expensive to outsource, because then you have runaway costs, and there's changes, and it's, even though it is an easier perhaps relationship to manage, because you've got someone else managing the engineers and their productivity, it is expensive. And the commercial model to get right for that to work with a startup is also hard, because most outsourcing service providers, they make money off enterprises. They don't make money off startups. Like, even if you go with a cost plus model, like, why would they then do that? Like, and we did that. I think I got like a really good deal, and it was still super expensive. Like, looking back, we wasted a lot of money. So I don't know if I'm giving you the answer to your question or just telling you what not to do. But I would say the ideal is to try and get a technical co-founder, even though that is like very difficult and it's not always available. And of course, if you're going to go ahead, irrespective, then you do the best that you can with the resources that you have at your availability. But I do understand why a lot of investors or VCs or whatever, they would always say, we don't even look at software business if there's no technical co-founder. Like, I do understand that as well, because it just makes it a lot harder in a journey that's already like super challenging.
Lisa.
Hi, yes. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. I liked Stefan's question about ladies in the environment that's pretty much male dominant. And I totally agree with everything that Annette said. It's so much better to be able to walk into a space and own it as a woman than feel intimidated, and especially when you're dealing with people like that guy in Ermelo who asked to speak to the owner of the company. So you've got to stand your ground as a woman and do that powerfully. So to my question, the reason I joined this webcast is because to my intrigue, I have another friend who also had absolutely no technical experience whatsoever and started up a software as a service business, and she's doing really well. To someone like me, my whole career has been in IT, and I'm a bit of a dinosaur, so I started a long time ago in a COBOL mainframe environment. And the question that I have is, my friend, I stepped in to help her because she didn't use all of the right governance and compliance, and when it came to actually having standards around managing developers, etc., she had no idea. So she had a dispute with a developer who changed all the passwords and shut her out of her code base, where he literally held a ransom. And that was just an example of one of the having breached what it is that we would have learned from years ago, and even now, where you put structures in place to make sure that you've got all the right disciplines and coding standards, that kind of thing. So, Annette, my question to you is, it sounds like you followed a path where you kept your costs low, but there might have been some mistakes that you made in terms of putting structures together to make sure that you were handling those engineers and who it is that you ended up working with properly. But what are the things that you would do differently in the context of governance, etc.? Apart from, like you said, potentially having a tech co-owner, what would you have done differently?
Luckily, we haven't had any issues on the being held ransom with a code base with a developer. I don't know if I'm just lucky or if we did have principles in place, but I think starting a business, and maybe because it wasn't my first business, even just with, general technical operations within the business, everything was always done within the company's name and under the company's control with company email addresses. Everything was always controlled within our environment, like nothing you were allowed to do with your personal email address. And we always treated the business like a business from the beginning. I mean, of course, there were vulnerabilities and we've had issues before that we had to solve, but I think in a non-technical language, we just always treated the business like a business, like how you would with any other business that you opened. It was never loose, if that makes sense. They were always, and I'm sure we can definitely still improve because it's still a startup, so there is lots of compliance risks around that, but we always had at least a level of awareness for it. It wasn't just like something that I wasn't aware of.
So if I can just, thanks. I think you have answered some of my questions, but I think there's quite a delicate balance because you need to have not spend too much money and over governance kind of, put too many structures in place. But at the same time, there has to be some. So I'm wondering if it would be opportunities for someone who's got all of the experience that I have to step into assist with maybe managing those kind of engineering companies that you worked with. So I've got all the knowledge and I'm a big picture thinker, but I'm not necessarily the kind of hard running entrepreneur that you are. So, with a balance, do you think that you would have had a benefit to having someone like me on board?
Oh, of course. I think there's a great opportunity for that kind of service. As startups or entrepreneurs, you've got people trying to offer you services coming out of your ears, from coaches to advisors to this and that. And it's really good. You should take mentorship and you should take guidance. But the one part that is quite slim is people really looking at the technology angle and assisting with that. So I do think there is an opportunity. And I think startups, especially where there are no technical co-founders, which we may even see more and more of in the future, as more and more people build businesses online, especially post-COVID, I think that's a very valuable offering and service that you can offer, especially with your experience. And having that kind of case study already with your friend, I'm sure that you can package that into something that you can offer other founders in similar positions. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. We have a last question. Barry?
Yes, how's it, Charles? Thanks, man. Hi, Annette. Thanks so much. Your talk was amazing. My wife and I are busy building a few tech products, and there was some great insights there, so thank you. Just one quick question. Flexyforce's market, are you focusing on a sort of bigger corporate market, or is it more your SME play, or are you through the whole market? Where have you positioned Flexyforce?
So I think it depends how you use it, but our primary market is medium-sized enterprises. So for a startup, you do not actually have that many suppliers to manage, so the admin isn't that great, even though we have seen a lot of startups benefit from using Flexyforce just because they don't have staff. So that does play a role. From a corporate perspective, the big hurdle there has been twofold. One, the dependency on a human sales force, and the second, the integration requirements or going up against, big organizations where your Oracles and SAPs are deeply embedded. So the corporate competitor of Flexyforce is SAP Fieldglass. And
Mhm.
even though obviously we feel Flexyforce is a far superior product, just as you guys would know, working in enterprises, getting, a standalone cloud-based product inputted in that environment is really challenging. But but we have seen some opportunities, and it's actually quite interesting. My kind of approach, whether this is right or wrong, I don't know, has been that the corporates must come to us. Like, we're not going to like chase after them. And so I have these discussions, and if they come back and they like really have a pain point that they want to solve, then they'll be willing to jump through the hurdles. And even today, we got a call from like Media24. We saw them like long ago, and they have obviously but that pain point. They pay like thousands of freelancers. But previously, when we try to pitch to them, you get into those hurdles, and then you need to fight almost like consulting firms. But for a startup at our level, that's a lot of time and energy and effort, and then you often get sucked into changing your product according to what they want. You actually just waste a lot of time, only at the end for them to say no. So I think if you have an SAP budget behind you and a Salesforce behind you, then you can do that with SAP Fieldglass, but not as a startup. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much.
Very cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. That was a great talk. That was a great presentation. Lots of questions coming up. Annette, thanks a lot for doing this. This was fantastic.
Pleasure.
And we hope to see you at future Tech and Tie-dye events, and maybe learn some more from you.
Yeah, I know, of course.